This learning object is going to explore what I like to call the not-so-simple simple pendulum. After reading 13.6 in the text, I couldn't believe that the period of a simple pendulum was calculated based on the pendulum's length and the force of gravity acting on the bob. What about the bob's mass? Shouldn't that be taken into account too? To explore why, I decided to create a simple pendulum of my own with a few materials lying around. A glass jar, some string, lots of tape, a pair of scissors, some liquid to fill the jar, and a stopwatch. First, I set up a simple pendulum with my empty jar as the bulb and length of string of about 30 centimeters. Then I timed 15 oscillations. This took my simple pendulum 17.96 seconds. And I created a simple pendulum for a bob of heavier mass. I filled the same glass jar with my liquid, but didn't change the length of the pendulum or the number of oscillations I was timing. So after 15 oscillations, I discovered that it took 18.01 seconds. And to my surprise, the time period for the two different pendulum systems was essentially exactly the same. Since changing the mass of the bob on my simple pendulum had no effect on the time it took to complete 15 oscillations, I decided to change the system's length to see if the period really did change with the length of the pendulum. Set up the exact same simple pendulum system with my empty jar, except this time I changed the length of the string to about 20 centimeters. I then proceeded to time 15 oscillations. This took 15.75 seconds, which is already less than my previous setup. Once again, I set up a simple pendulum with the same parameters as the one before, except this time for a bob with greater mass. I then proceeded to time 15 oscillations. This took my pendulum 15.68 seconds. The time period for the oscillating masses at the same pendulum lengths was essentially the same. However, this value was different than the time period for my first two systems. This led me to conclude that the mass of the bob had no effect on its period. But why? After a little more research, it dawned on me that the bobs of greater mass experienced a greater force of gravity, since force is mass times acceleration. And although they experienced a greater force of gravity, they were also harder to set into motion than the lighter bobs. I concluded that the ratio of these forces, the force of gravity and the bob's resistance to that force, was the same for bobs of varying masses. And that is why the mass of a pendulum's bob has no effect on its period, because the ratio of these two forces will always be the same, no matter how big or how small the pendulum's bob is. I hope this helped.